Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome back to Good for the Soul, episode number 5. In this episode, I sat down with Craig Hanaumi, and some of you guys may already know him as Officer Craig. He's a Bellevue Police Officer. He does a lot of community outreach in his, in that city and all over, right? Being able to use social media as a tool. He skateboards with kids in the community. He's always doing outreach programs through Jiu Jitsu and boxing, and you'll see him doing a bunch of different things. He plays a trombone as well. So you'll see him in band class, doing a lot of outreach with the uniform on, so that he tries to get the community and people more comfortable with officers, really being the bridge between cops and the civilians, right? I think he does a really good job of that. I've been following along with his content for years, so I was super stoked that he was up for sitting down, training with me, talking jiu-jitsu, and sharing his opinions about what's going on in the world on the officer side, as well as, his entrance into jiu-jitsu. That's also how I came across Craig however many years ago on social media. He just got his brown belt last year under Rener and Ryron Gracie, two pretty prolific names in the jiu-jitsu world, so that was really cool to see. I was super stoked for him. It was a great conversation. On top of that, guys, again, he doesn't train specifically at a formal gym. He bounces around a couple different places, so you'll see him around. He trains at his Bellevue Police Officer headquarters. So the morning I showed up, we 5 or 6 a.m. got over there, and we showed up. We're actually not saying much, and this is the first time we meet because it's bright and early, right? So we get in, start putting on our gi, and we're chopping up a little bit. And another one of his officers comes in, Larry. Super cool guy as well, and we end up sharing techniques with each other for 20-30 minutes. We end up doing some light rolls and flow rolls and just having a great time. And what I love about that is the minute you put your hands on someone in jiu-jitsu and get to connect, you really get to know who that person is, right? And I think we built a friendship instantly, and I think it really showed itself in that conversation. So that was really cool, and I really enjoyed what we showed each other, and just that environment, and also what he's doing for the community. So I'm super excited to share this conversation with you guys. Before we jump in that conversation, I just want to remind you guys, you should check out Jocko Fuel products. Right today, I'm drinking my greens right here. They're freaking delicious. Yeah, those superfoods. So go check that out, jockofuel.com. You'll get 10% off at checkout using the code GOODFORTHESOUL, as well as originusa.com. So gis, rash guards, apparel, all that kind of stuff. So jockofuel.com and originusa.com, and use Good for the Soul at checkout. And without further ado, guys, here's the interview with Craig Hanaumi. Well, Officer Craig, thank you so much for sitting down with me. That was a fun and awesome training session we just had.
Thank you, man.
Dude, learned a lot. That was great. All those little details and flowing and having fun on the mat, and training jiu-jitsu, it's a blast. I think that's what we live for, in a sense.
It's all about right there.
Yeah, man. We know jiu-jitsu is good for the soul, so we're talking good for the soul today. And I appreciate you having me out here again. It's a true honor. We know what you do in the community. We all see on Instagram. It's awesome. We're all loving it. But man, trying to attract more people to jiu-jitsu is my goal here. And I want to know, what attracted you to jiu-jitsu? What brought you into the game?
That's a good question, Victor. For me, it was work, self-defense, kind of focus. I'm not a big person, right? Mm-hmm. And I knew right away from going into this profession that my relative strength compared to a bigger person doesn't really mean that much. Mm-hmm. Being smaller in stature and weight, I need something else, right? And I think many people get into our line of work. I say median age range of the academy is probably mid-20s, late 20s. Okay. So at an age when you are theoretically could be close to what people generally think is your physical prime. Yeah. Late 20s, early 30s. And I was in that, and I think the typical metrics that people use to measure, like bench press or whatever, lifting some weight or running or whatever it was, is by that metric I was the fittest I ever was. But in spite of that, I still felt very unprepared. So I was like, I need something else. And I Googled Jiu-Jitsu police. I've seen, from like many people who grew up in the 90s, seeing the UFC and how it was implemented in that kind of arena, it made me want to know more.
Yeah.
So did you have an attraction to martial arts prior to becoming an officer? Like, did you know about martial arts, or did you do it and then reality hit you one day, maybe on the patrol or something, like, wow, I need to get better at this? Like, where did that really come from?
Well, I grew up in Hawaii, and like a lot of people, maybe not just Hawaii, just as a kid, a typical boy, I think. At some point, we go through a ninja phase.
I went through one as well, yeah.
Many years of that. And so my parents were, they exposed me to different things like Kung Fu, Kempo. I got to try, and it was all in my mind that, well, this will help me become a ninja. This is just another step to becoming a ninja. But that was it. And back then, when I was growing up in the 80s, there wasn't any Jiu Jitsu schools. And so I always had an appreciation for martial arts, like a fascination with combat and weaponry and all those things that are connected to what most people connect to martial arts.
Gotcha. So the curiosity was there.
Yeah, it was always there. Watched other movies like was it Revenge of the Ninja 1 through 4 and whatever else things was back then. And I mean, it's kind of fake, but anyway, it was nobody had to tell me to try it, and I was interested, and it transitioned to a work-related necessity later on.
Right. So that's what drew you maybe into the martial arts side. But what drew you into being a police officer? What was that?
I don't really have a good, I wish I had a really interesting story about it, but I fell into the work from just doing different types of jobs after I graduated from college, and none of them they were all great jobs. I was a behavioral aide, worked with teens that had autism, different degrees on the spectrum, in the school and the home setting. And then I was an outreach counselor for a little while, personal trainer for a little while. And those were all great jobs, which actually all supplemented and helped my work now. But I never felt like my parents were super content with that. Even they never outwardly said it. They just were. I felt like they were always waiting for me to get the real job. Like, that's a good for now thing. But what is your actual, eventual one? And after graduating, school was really not an enjoyable thing. Even though I somehow graduated from college, graduate school was expensive, and I just didn't want to do anymore. And for what I enjoyed, I enjoyed counseling, the role of being a counselor. You need to go to grad school. There's no way I'm going to go to 2 more years of school, plus it's expensive. And then I was like, well, what can my degree be used for? Right? Psychology, sociology, psychology are very similar in that if you have them as a 4-year degree, you can't really, there's not many jobs that you can get to utilize them.
You need that extra schooling to really have that job.
Any counseling position, you need a master's in counseling or social work. And I was like, and I can do that. So I just eventually, for my family, big mom and dad, both sides had a lot of siblings, so lots of uncles and aunties and cousins. And my mom's side has very academically, very rock star on the academic side on my mom's side. And so all the jobs that people typically connect with getting an education, like teacher, my mom was a teacher, we got the engineer, the veterinarian, my sister's a pediatrician. So she was in medical school while I'm trying to figure out what I'm going to do. Like, oh great, man. Got to live up to being in medical school, I'm never going to be able to do that. So I was like, well, nobody's in law enforcement.
Right.
I can carve my own path. I won't be compared to anybody, and that was a downside. I enjoyed teaching as a activity to help people. I think service-oriented roles were always probably for my parents, but I didn't want to be like, well, that's just another teacher, just like your mom. I didn't want that.
Right.
And plus, there's some pieces of the job that I didn't think were enjoyable. Just watching her do lesson plans and correct papers and prep for the next day and prep during the summertime for the fall, and then there's all this work outside of the time frame of when she actually was getting paid. It's like, this is not worth it.
That makes sense.
And I had to get compared to her, which was a standard. It was too high of a standard. It's like, I'm never going to reach that. And so law enforcement was kind of a path that nobody else did. I wouldn't be able to be compared to anybody else in my immediate family. And it was a job that was, in my parents' view, very respectable, stable, and good retirement. And both sides, my mom being a teacher, the teachers union, and my dad worked in the Department of Labor, which had a very strong union back in Hawaii. And I think they liked the fact that the job had stability.
Cool.
And I think that was one of the main reasons. They kind of, I almost felt like a relief, like, okay, go ahead and do your police thing, and they left me alone. So
Cool.
that's how.
What age did you go into the police department at?
I was probably either 27 or 28, something like that, like late 20s.
Cool.
And that's about the age that most people, if they're going to do a median age range, that's
about
typical.
That. Yeah, and the reason I ask when I chat with police officers, because I think at times people put the profession of law enforcement on either a pedestal or potentially forget, hey, service is a really good profession. You know, it helps the community, which you do quite a bit of.
Yes, enjoyable.
Do you remember day one of Jiu Jitsu? What was stepping on the mats like for the first time?
Well, for me, it was, luckily our academy in Honolulu had some integrated groundwork.
Oh, okay.
I didn't understand a lot of it. I didn't understand, not just, I mean, the mechanics were easy. It's very fundamental level mechanics of escaping from the bottom. That's easy to understand, right? You don't want to be stuck down there. So how do you get out of there? So those kinds of things, we did mount escapes, the trap and rolls.
Okay.
The piece that wasn't really explained to us well was disengaging or escaping from somebody's guard. Like, I totally did not. I remember vividly thinking, like, I don't want to, this person's on their back, I'm on top of them as far as where we are in relation to the ceiling. And they have their legs around me, like, what is that? Like, why is that bad? Like, I didn't even understand. Like, they never. Right. I think there was a presumption, like, oh, everybody knows, you know. It's like, I didn't date this because this is how you open it and this is how you break it. It's like, but I mean, it's like, this is what else can be done to me? Like, I didn't even understand arm locks or triangles because they didn't show us. They didn't say, well, this person could know some kind of mechanics to you. And I don't want to. It's not a fault of theirs because, like, you know, I think that was still way more than anybody else was getting shown anywhere probably in the country back then. That was like early 2000s. But
pre-social media, pre-big internet, all that stuff. Yeah.
Like, well, this is the guard, and this is how you break out of it. It's like, oh, okay. Can't you just like punch this person in the face? Like, I don't understand why am I in danger? I just didn't understand that. And then so we did that, like a simple kind of guard breaking, and then disengaging and getting up and. So that was the first exposure. So it wasn't in a class, but I've told this story before. But the first actual non-training related, non-police training related jiu-jitsu exposure was in the area where I worked on Oahu. So there's a side of the island, the windward side, which has basically the northeast side of Oahu, going from Waimanalo all the way to get to the north shore. So Waimanalo, Kailua, Kaneohe, Kahalu, up all the way to Laie, Haula, up to the North Shore, Kahuku. And that side of the island was where I was assigned to work. And in that side of the island, in Kaneohe, there was a jiu-jitsu school taught by a brown belt at the time of Rener and Gracie, which, like I said, we talked about. He has a humongous presence in the state. And I said, wow, maybe I'll go train. This is my area. I get to kind of kill two birds with one stone, get to know people who possibly live in the area, plus train jiu-jitsu. And Ron Shiraki is his name in Hawaii. People know who that is. He is super nice and open to having me come in. He's like, yeah, just say, well, how much does it cost? And back then, I don't know how to do it right now, but he basically let me. He's like, oh, you can just pay me like $5 or something. Just come in, $5. He appreciated that there was a presence of police to help keep away any person who was not having a good intention.
Yeah,
that's what in his mind, and it made sense.
Cool.
I don't think you have like a bunch of people who are trying to commit crimes, go to a place where there's like a law enforcement.
Yeah. Problem. Or just open mat space with nothing to steal.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that too. Yeah, and it's like, okay, well, that's it's a win-win. So I did my first class there. It was probably the only class, and we got paired up. And then my training partner was doing same typical outline of a class. So you do some calisthenics, aerobic, you do some technique, drill it, and then you spar.
Yep.
So we did the whole class, and then we started the sparring round. And the sparring round was inside the closed guard. I was in the guard, and the person was like, "Oh, okay." So it flashed. It was like
back to the academy.
Interesting. Like, okay, I've been here before. Just keep my arms inside bicep position, and in my brain, I'm like, well, if I don't get submitted, then that's great. If I don't get reversed, that's great. And then 5-minute round, and just staying there the whole time. And it was 5 minutes, and it was completed, and it was like, oh, didn't get submitted. And then I also reflected, like, well, right at that moment. Trying to feel good about myself, I also was like, well, I didn't do anything to the other person. Like, I was stuck in between his legs the whole 5 minutes. Like I remember I tried to do the moves that we learned at the academy to break the guard open. Like I couldn't, you know, I was off balance and had to restart. And then every time I restart, I was like, oh, I better get my hands back inside. I was like, that's all I knew. I didn't even understand what for. Like they didn't even, you know.
They have the why behind it.
Yeah, I said, but just do this. They put your hands here because putting your hands on the mat is dangerous. Like, okay, just get my hands back there. And that went on the whole 5 minutes. And like, man, I was stuck. Even though I didn't get submitted, I was stuck. And then I was reflecting, and you know, I told my partner, I was like, oh, really good job. How long have you been training? You know, I said, about like 1 or 2 years. 1 or 2 years. Like, oh, that's really good, man. And don't mind my asking, like, how old are you? And he goes, 13. And then this had the whole conflict. Where I was at my physical prime, right, 28, 29. Never gonna bench press more. Never gonna run faster. And I was being controlled from the bottom by a middle school kid. And I was like, oh my gosh, that was almost the paradigm shift that happens, right, when people realize like your strength attributes are important and very helpful, but if a person has some kind of mechanic and technique, they can neutralize it significantly. Because I was like, there's no way this kid can bench press more than me. Like middle school kid, he might be able to run fast as me, but I guarantee he can't do more bench press. And I was like, man, and I was stuck.
Yeah.
And that was one of the moments like many people have when they start training. It's like, I need to either, I don't know. And at that point, I think I was like, I wasn't ready to accept learning my ego or whatever. You know, I was like, I almost felt like, wait, should I bench press more now? Maybe I should run faster. And then that was completely wrong.
Yeah.
Like, you know, but I realized right away, like, I'm not going to, my strength and everything attribute-wise was almost to the plateau already.
Yeah.
And like anything else, once it plateaus, it's going to go down. And I think it took me a couple of years to, when I moved to Washington to start working for our department here, like I had to, I was ready to revisit everything at that point. I was like, okay, let me Google Jiu Jitsu police. And that's how I came across the course that Rener and Ryron teaching twice.
Okay, awesome.
And our department paid for it. So I got a training request approved. And my very first extended exposure to Jiu Jitsu was their week-long their class.
Well, hang on, before we get too far away from it, because I think it's a really important point you brought up. I'm glad you told the story. For trying to keep people in the Jiu-Jitsu, trying to attract people to Jiu-Jitsu, what about in that moment, because we've all heard the story of someone's ego being tested. Hey, wow, a 13-year-old, you know, I'm trained with, I can't do anything, and you're having this revelation about your physical strength, you know. What about you personally maybe, or could others take from that to stay on the mats, how to get over that hump if they are feeling, you know, a woman's tearing them up on the mat, or, you know, a young middle schooler? How does people get past that and stay into Jiu-Jitsu?
Well, that's the interesting, I think some people, that's the hook, right? To some people, it's like, oh my gosh, I need to learn this because this child or this woman or whoever, this old man is like, I can't do anything, right? Or I can do stuff, but they're able to do stuff back to me, which doesn't make sense as far as our attributes go. I think the hard part is for some people that will be a negative thing, right? And so the same reason why it's so addicting to some people is the same reason why it's so aversive to other people. And I think maybe if a person was going into it with information like, hey, if you do the pathway like how typical schools have it set up, and if you spar with a person, you're going to experience being stuck or submitted many, many times, and maybe having that information like front-loaded in advance might help. I don't know. Like you have to expect that you're going to feel like completely clueless, presuming they go through that pathway of drill, aerobic workout, drill, spar.
Right.
And if they do the sparring part, right, there's going to be a amount of very uncertainty and, like I said, I think discomfort, because nobody likes to, most people don't like to have that happen to them. And I think to recognize, like, just like how people do other stuff like cold exposure or whatever, you have to change your brain to acclimate to it versus like, aversive, like I don't want to, right? It's like that's part of the deal, right? That's and I think that would help, or changing the structure of go to a school that doesn't have that kind of immersion into it, like a slower, a more gentler, a more like a less, like where the learning curve is not like, okay, jump in the pool, and some people enjoy that one, and some people want that one, and a lot of people don't want that one, and that's that reason. Like I said, ironically, that's also the reason why people don't like training. Because they're afraid of maybe not just getting embarrassed, but getting hurt, you know, which is I mean, that's a valid reason.
Yep.
That's, you know, I'm not gonna be like, well, could I get actually injured in that thing? Like, let me go do that, you know. That's not normal behavior, right? Normal mindset. And people who don't have that one, that might prohibit them from even exploring it at all. And
Yeah.
that's the hard, that's the unfortunate part, right?
Okay. No, it totally makes sense. So you had this initial, hell, let me go find more jiu-jitsu as part of the profession, but because you've been doing it for a long time now, you do a lot of outreach in your community, where did your passion and love from jiu-jitsu actually come from, and maybe where did it start? You know, because maybe it was, from what I'm hearing from you, it started because of your profession.
Yeah.
But then when did it turn into a passion, into something you really enjoy, you know?
Yeah, it definitely evolved. And I think it connected to, in the beginning, like I said, the jobs I'd done before, the things that I enjoyed were connected to helping people. And jiu-jitsu is another way of helping people. And besides, in the beginning it was for myself, right? Kind of like a selfish reason to self-improvement, self-empowerment, but it morphed into, well, it is also a tool to connect and empower other people. And I think people do training for all reasons, but I feel like if you aren't doing that piece, you're not fully utilizing jiu-jitsu for what it could be used for. I mean, self-improvement is amazing, but empowering other people it's like another level of the return you get from that. I don't think is comparable to anything else. It's just there's nothing like it.
That's great. So you had mentioned once you came to Washington, you started Bellevue Police Department. You Googled jiu-jitsu. How did you get involved with Rener and Ryron?
Well, that course, their course back then in 2008 is when I first got to experience it, and it was probably, I told people before, if I had to envision a scenario for a person to have an introduction to the art that was interested obviously in doing it, but not maybe a my size person, you know. And I think people forget, like, well, if you're not an average size human being, you're much smaller. Gravity and physics comes into the equation way more than people forget. Like, 'cause if you're just 100 pounds, 50 pounds heavier, that's a significant amount. And to never have that advantage or that start off, it's you appreciate stuff way more. And the way they frame their course is it's for that person. It's for the smaller person, even though they're gigantic. Right? Like, that's the whole biggest irony. It's like, wait a minute, you guys are like humongous. Like, they teach as if they're, you know, my size.
Yeah.
And they teach it through the lens of a person that's my size, which is that's not easy. I mean, some people, you can, you know, bigger people have a harder time doing that because they have to pretend like they don't have those attributes. And that's not easy to do, right? And then you have to sell it to a person who's watching it like, wait, is that just working because you're 6'4", or is that because it's a technique, right? And they're able to navigate and do that really well. And the course, besides it being for work and having jiu-jitsu in it, it was connected with other, it was from a lens, it wasn't just like, oh, here's a bunch of jiu-jitsu moves, and you can show it and then now go back to your agency and teach them. It's from the lens of us. So there's incorporated things connected to, okay, once I have an arm lock, how do I, like, that's great, they're giving up, but like, now what? Like, do I just let go? Like, okay, stand up and shake each other's hands. Like, I gotta handcuff this person. And how do I get from this to handcuffing, right? And just simple things like that, or even just, they have a super simple phrase for their punch protection versus the weapons. So overhooks for punch protection, right? Overhooks, and then underhooks for weapon retention. It's like, oh my gosh, it's so simple.
Even now I'm like, oh yeah, that totally makes sense. Here they can't touch your belt, and then here they can't hit you.
Yeah, and it's like, it takes it's ironic also, it takes a civilian, a non-law enforcement persons to share those kinds of things. Like, how come, you know, we that's our job. Like, we're supposed to be able to. But that's often the case, right? There's stuff from like any person, any instructor, any black belt, they have pieces of because they're subject matter experts in their craft, right? And they can share those pieces to us, and then we can filter them through what we do, and then say, oh, that would be good right there. That grip or that position, right? I mean, like Russian tie. Right? Like that's a setup to doing some of our takedowns, and we start on the side of people for escorting them out of places. Same thing for security or bouncers or stuff like that. And it's like, so how do you get to that, and how do you keep that, and what do you do from there? Like all that is us. Once it goes to certain positions on the ground, it's like, okay, well, I wouldn't necessarily like attack somebody's legs.
Right.
That's I'm not trying to submit them. I'm just trying to have them stuck and not get up,
Yep.
right? Or transition to handcuffing. But it's neat how there's like little pieces in the grapple that translate really well to us. And I think a person who obviously has no context, they just show the whole thing, right? Like,
Right.
oh, this is from the beginning to end. And then what we do is. Like Larry, our
Yep.
partner Larry and Raf, we look at it through our lens, like, okay, that little piece right there, we can use that piece. And it's neat to have it that way. So anyway, just the introduction couldn't have been better. And it just led to a lifelong appreciation and fascination with it. And I think...
And now with this brand, you're fully body age. We love jiu-jitsu.
Too late now. Too late.
You can't go back.
And it's neat how it progressed. And I don't know. I mean, I think I tell people too, the thing people don't always get from the outside looking at it is if they see outreach like the skateboarding or the whatever it is, the self-defense classes or whatever thing it is, all those activities are enhanced by the idea in the back of my head that if something goes wrong, I have a plan.
Right.
And I think the one downside to doing outreach, if there was a downside, is that if you talk about from a tactical perspective, right? If I'm going to go and interact with this group of people, I have to purposely take myself away from my car, away from potentially other backup, and I put myself out there in a position that would be less advantageous than if I came in with like 3 or 4 people. And I have to accept that as a possible risk. I mean, there's no other way you can do it. Like I wouldn't be able to do as much of it if I didn't put myself in those positions. And having a plan in case something goes wrong is the reason why I feel like I'm more comfortable to do that. Because if I didn't have that, I would still probably do it, but in the back of my head, I'm gonna be like, wow, I'm gonna be stuck here for like 2 or 3 minutes. Like, what am I gonna do?
Yeah.
And that would almost make it not. It would incentivize it to not happen.
Right. And the quality of outreach may not be as good.
No, I don't think so.
Well, and I think you're speaking to something so important for, again, trying to draw people into jiu-jitsu and keep them in jiu-jitsu is the confidence that you have to be able to do those things because of the skills you have. They
go hand in hand.
Yeah.
And I think people don't understand that in the beginning. Like, well, for our work, I mean, there's a hype of presuming a person wants police and presuming, it's not like a get rid of the law enforcement altogether. People believe that, and I respect their opinion. But presuming the person wants to have a law enforcement presence, there's a emphasis on training. If they're, like I said, they want that. That is not connected to the physical side, and the reasoning is that if there's an incident that happens that is not favorable to look at or view, say, well, we need to have a person practice verbal de-escalation, verbal communication, dialogue, interaction, because that will prevent the physical in people's minds, or views.
Yeah.
And that's I would agree with that, except for the fact that if you don't have the physical piece in place, the person will not be able to be as comfortable in an interaction in the first place.
Right.
So their demeanor will be at a more elevated state.
Yep.
And then right? I mean, some of the calmest people that we know is like jiu-jitsu practitioners.
Yep.
Like
Absolutely.
nothing bothers them, or very minimal things bother them. And how do people become like that, right? Part of it is this inoculation and this acclimation to stress, right? Of trying to have somebody not strangle you, or trying to have somebody not like hyperextend your arm or your foot or whatever. And that translates to non-physical stuff.
Absolutely.
And I think people don't connect that. Like many times people are like, well, why are you training that instead of, like, you guys train so much like kung fu or martial arts or karate or whatever it is, you're not training how to talk to people. But people don't understand that when you have the competency physically, you'll be more comfortable talking to people just automatically.
Yes.
And then you can have some specific like reflective listening, like, oh, I see what you're saying is like that all is to me supplementing the physical, not the other way around. Because if you don't have that physical piece in the back of your head, you're gonna be like, well, if something goes wrong, and that will reflect. Like I feel that people will pick up on that, like, hey, you're trying to act calm, but you're not really like calm right now. Like, what's going on? And that piece comes from the comfort of being put in positions that you don't want to be in, and being able to survive and escape them. And that doesn't happen in any other way except for physical training. And you just cannot. if there was some way we could share and educate people about that, especially obviously like people in legislative positions.
Yeah.
By bringing them in to do station tours, which is kind of like a station tour. If I tell you to do a station tour, it's going to come through here and we're going to like, hey, you have anything wrong with you? Like, no. Oh,
here's this uniform.
Hey, why don't you go on this? You're going to do some scenario training, and then people. It's like an inside joke. Like when I say station tour, it means like training.
Yep.
You know? Even though it's a real station tour, it is a real station tour. But if the person is down to experience something, they're coming in here for sure. And I think that's the best way to share, right?
That's great, yeah.
Seeing somebody do jiu-jitsu is cool, and talking about it obviously is cool, but experiencing it is another level of comprehension.
Absolutely.
And I feel like that's the most powerful way it can be shared. It's like, well, try this out, see how this move, and then you contrast it, like the brothers do a really good job of, it's part of their introductory lesson, almost outline, is they make the person experience a position, unfavorable one without jiu-jitsu, and they go, this is our solution to this problem. And people's minds go like, what? And then it's like every single move has that, right? And then you get people like, so wait a minute, this problem that I thought was unsolvable has an answer like this simple answer right here. And what else can that be applied to? Like everything, right?
Absolutely.
So it transcends the.
It does for sure. When you started with Rener and Ryron, and you're going to California to train, did you notice your patrols went differently, or were you tested with these maybe new techniques that you've been learning from them in the real world? Did you have any situations where, wow, my jiu-jitsu is being really successful, and if I didn't have this right now, I may be in a much worse position?
For the first part, yeah, I'd say definitely yes. Majority of the time, it's not a physical expression of the art. It's the knowing that I have that as a backup.
Okay.
And that is exhibited in a contact of a person.
Okay.
Being able to remain calm longer, right? I mean, everybody has a threshold where they get into this point of like, what do we call it? The lizard brain or the monkey brain, like the fight or flight. Like everybody has a threshold where that will pass that point or get to that point.
Okay.
I think jiu-jitsu people have a higher one than the average person, right? Way higher, because say, oh, we get stuck underneath someone? Like, that's like a Monday night. Somebody's behind me trying to strangle me. Say every single class. So, right, there's less fear because it's just so much acclimation of that. And then the higher your threshold for being able to keep your cool. I mean, I think people sometimes especially if they have a mental health issue, they don't even understand what's happening anyways.
Right.
But our ability to remain calm for a longer period of time that's jiu-jitsu right there. It's not a physical expression of the art, but that's what is causing that.
Gotcha.
And then there has been times where we had to use techniques to control. I mean, up until 2-3 years ago, our agency allowed the neck restraint. Right? We call it a neck restraint, rear naked choke, right? And man, if you have a person who has the ability to use that, I mean, right? It neutralizes. It's not magic, but I mean, it neutralizes like size and strength as much as you can realistically do it, right?
Yeah.
And in a way that is even better for the person than manhandling or trying to outmuscle, right?
Yeah.
Try to outmuscle somebody's getting hurt probably, and that's not what. I mean, whoever it is, it's a lose, Yep. If the person gets hurt, that's not good. If we get hurt, it's not good. And it's so interesting because I got to do maybe 3 applications of our neck restraint on duty, and 2 of them the person went unconscious and they woke up in handcuffs. Then that was it.
Wow.
I mean, that's the whole point. I mean, especially for a my-sized person, like what else am I gonna do? Like even I guess you're like, well, I'm gonna lift you up off the ground, and it's like, no, you gonna lift me off the ground, and like I'll bend your arm straight and do like. I can't do that. I already know beforehand. I don't have the strength or the leverage to control. And so then it's like, well, there shouldn't be a police. It's like, no. You don't have enough officers to accommodate with any height or any weight being eligible. You can like restrict it some more, right? And I think the irony or the unfortunate part is tools like that. Obviously, if a tool of any kind is used in an incorrect way, it could injure somebody. That's not exclusive to jiu-jitsu. That's like anything.
Yeah.
Or any action, basically, right? Even just holding somebody down, like that could hurt somebody if you don't understand how to use your body, which is also from jiu-jitsu. But if you take away something, right, like you have this spectrum of force. If you're gonna visualize it, and this is like none, and this is like the highest level, like like a firearm. Typically, people say, "Oh, I can't get higher level than a firearm," and everything in between, right? And many of the jiu-jitsu control holds are in between, right? They could be at the highest level, right? Like, but they also are in between. And if you take away a tool that is in between, like to me, the neck restraint, when you do it right, that's not I don't know if you realize, but in many states in the country, wrapping somebody's neck like that is the same level of force as shooting somebody. Equivalent.
I did not know
That's
that.
deadly force. This defined a deadly force application for an officer is if an officer encircles the neck with any limb of theirs.
Wow.
So you wrap somebody's neck. That's by the definition for many places now, it's deadly force.
Dang.
Which is, like I said, deadly force means a force that could result in a person having serious bodily injury or death. That's the same
That's
category.
wild to me.
Which is and I always pose this to people, and especially jiu-jitsu people react like you, Victor. They're like, man, I just did deadly force like 5 times to people.
Yeah, you're baseball.
We literally did deadly force right now. Like, and then people who don't train don't understand that. They have this idea of, well, you touch somebody's neck, and I'm not saying it's diminishing the possibility. It's
Correct.
still possible, but you cannot tell me that wrapping somebody's neck with a triangle or a collar choke or any kind of strangle, guillotine, anything, that's the same level of force as me taking a pistol and shooting somebody with it. Like, there's no way that that's even on the same page, but that's what it is.
That's wild.
And unfortunately, if you equate that to that, right, people can be like, well, we don't need any more deadly forces, right? We have enough already, and that's one of the reasons why people, to prevent any kind of death. And that's a whole nother debate. But if a person looks at it from a practical standpoint, or not practical, but like from data, right? It's like, well, how much people are dying in jiu-jitsu from rear naked chokes? Like all the jiu-jitsu schools in the world, or any kind of strangle.
Has anyone in a jiu-jitsu?
Well, that's what I'm saying. It's like, presuming there was somebody somewhere out there, what percentage is that of the millions of applications in just like a year, right? You think about all the people in cooperation with a training partner, in a sparring, in a competition, UFC, amateur, every single, and not just jiu-jitsu, then you add in like judo, right? Whatever, Krav Maga, Sav Maga. You add in all those arts, it's like, well, what percentage are the people who are getting serious injuries from jiu-jitsu? That specific application.
Honestly.
And it's possible. I'm not saying it's not possible, right?
But I've never heard of it.
It's low, and the percent, so whatever that percentage. Okay, what is the percent of people getting injured from other force-on-force tactics, like punching somebody in the face? Like, if I punch you in the face really hard, how much percent people are gonna get injured from that? Like 100%. Like, okay, wait a minute. So you have a thing that causes like 1% chance of injury or less, way less, versus something that for sure is gonna injure somebody. And you'd rather me do that thing? Like, it doesn't make sense when you talk about.
I've never heard anyone phrase it like, this is wonderful, yeah.
Well, for sure.
So clear.
It's inevitable that like impact tools or impact tactics will hurt the other person. It will either hurt them or it won't be effective.
Correct.
Right? I'll be like, stop fighting, stop resisting. Like, that's not gonna even do nothing. And it looks just as bad as if you're doing it full blast.
Yep.
Right? So you punch somebody 10 times, any amount of times it looks bad. But the more you do it, the worse it is. But ironically, you have to do it more if it's not effective.
Correct.
So it becomes like a kind of like a paradox. Like, okay, and then so if you take anyway, back to my rear naked choke vascular neck restraint. We had it on our if you make a continuum, is a intermediate level force tool, which means that it's not deadly force. Which if you're talking about jiu-jitsu, like, yeah, it's not deadly force. We do that every day to each other multiple times. And if you take a thing like that away from the spectrum, right, you have the whole thing, like, this is nothing, this is the highest level. You take an intermediate tool away like that, what is the replacement then?
Right.
Like, if you're telling me, like, okay, I kind do this, okay, well, what is the alternative then?
Yeah.
If you're not gonna put one, that's one less thing I can do. And ironically, if you think about it from the levels of force, right, and a person is going to escalate, right, like, this doesn't work, what's you gonna do next? You can do that again? Okay, it doesn't work. Now what? You're gonna have to
Get to that.
do another.
tool further.
Well, you have to do something else, right?
Yeah.
Do it harder, like more force, right? Like if it's like strikes, right? Like, I gotta punch the person harder now. Okay, that's not working. I gotta impact them with something else. I'll use my baton now. Oh, that's not working. I gotta use my taser. Okay, that didn't work. And so you're kind of, ironically, you're making the force you're making the injury more likely to happen when you take away the intermediate tools.
And is the rear naked choke a tool that you are currently not allowed to use here in Washington or in your department? What are the rules here?
Both. Well, we used to have it. Like I said, 2019 or 2020, it got recategorized and then I guess essentially taken away. And like I said, the only people who say that from the majority would be jiu-jitsu people, right?
Yeah.
And like I said, I'm not saying it's foolproof, right? Nothing is foolproof. I mean, you can push somebody and they can fall down and hurt themselves.
Yep.
But the percentage of times that people get injury from a correctly applied application is so much less than almost any other thing. And if you look at data, right, and you look at statistics of applications versus injury, there's no other technique or tactic that is as low as that. And
so with that tool being removed, right, what adjustments are you making, and maybe your training and thought process if you do come across an encounter? What's the replacement?
Well, the replacement is being able to have to physically control somebody better.
Okay.
Right, because the fight will be prolonged if you cannot just end it with a person getting their neck wrapped.
Gotcha.
They will be able to.
So what does that equate to? More training time, more ground control practice?
Well, that's what it should equate to, right? But the challenge is it's not. I mean, that doesn't mean like, well, since we take away this tool, we'll give you this replacement of more training time to do this. That's not how it works. It's unfortunately, well, you don't have this tool now, and good luck. Like, well, just gotta figure it out some other way. And you know, right? If you're trying to control a person, and you don't have the ability to hold them in a position where you have the leverage to negotiate, like wrapping their neck or holding their arm in a position or whatever to say, hey, you keep fighting, you're gonna hurt yourself. If without that tool, they're gonna keep going.
Right.
If a person is really goal-oriented and wants to keep fighting, right? What is gonna make them stop? And then people are gonna, well, that's when you learn how. It's sometimes frustrating when somebody goes, well, that's when you got to learn how to talk to people. Like, that's not the time to do any kind of negotiation when a person is in that state of mind. Like, you're not talking anybody down from anything when they're actively, physically doing something already.
Yep.
And then people are like, well, you need to do it before. It's like, yeah, that's not always possible, right? And that's the hard part too, because some people, have this idea like, well, you can always talk somebody down, and because sometimes there's incidents that get captured on video or whatever, of a situation where some person has a dialogue with another human being and whatever they're doing, right, with a knife or gonna jump or whatever it is, trying to harm, they're able to have a rapport and then, wow, this person is now on the same page and they have this connection and now they're verbally de-escalate the situation. And that's amazing when that happens. The problem is, that's not because of, there's two pieces to it, right? It's the officer and their approach. But people forget, like, the other person has a say in what's happening too.
Correct.
If the other person doesn't want to, they're not going to do it. And I think people have this presumption like, well, you just gotta talk to them until whatever, or talk to them like this person in this situation. It's like, that's not that person. That's a different person.
Yeah.
And even if it's the same person in a different situation, that's different. And so it's a challenge. And I mean, I think for us, the challenge is how can we negotiate articulating more training at a time where there's a push to do the opposite of that. Not to do the opposite of no training, it's just
it is weird times for sure.
Funding, and then funding indirectly affects training, because funding
training's the first thing that goes to.
Well, training costs money, and you're looking at the budget like, well, what thing can we take away from this budget right now? It's like, well, we need this many officers, we need this many police cars. What? And it's like, oh, we don't need this like block of training over here. We'll just move that, and then now we can just operate like how we did before, and we save this money. It's like, okay, but at the expense of what potentially later on.
Right.
Anyway.
So what can we? One thing we were talking about before we started training actually was, I think too much pressure sometimes gets put on the law enforcement themselves. Each city, I mean, if you have more than 500 officers, you're a big department for the most part. So I think personal responsibility for the citizens should be more important than what we and how we judge police officers. What can we as citizens do to better our community and better ourselves, and maybe even our understanding of the profession of law enforcement?
That's a good question. And I think since we're talking about this topic of training, I think we mentioned before, there's not really a reason you can think of that is negative to have more people trained. People would worry about, well, potentially a person could use jiu-jitsu for wrong reasons. I mean, that's just like any other thing. I mean, I think the benefit of having a person who has the ability to protect himself the benefit of that potential outweighs any risk of somebody using jiu-jitsu for the wrong reason. I mean, that happens. That's going to happen no matter what. And I think it's on the jiu-jitsu community to kind of regulate and monitor that piece and make sure people are training for good intentions and the right reason. And I mean, if more people trained, like we were talking about before, I think there will be less. I think in general, less reliance upon other people for other things is a good thing.
Yeah.
I mean, that's why I believe. Maybe some people don't think that, but I feel like if you are able to have self-reliance, the more of that you have, the better your life will be in general for not just physically, but just anything, right?
Yeah.
And I don't know. I think I don't know if that's how that sentiment is shared, nationally, but
yeah.
It seems like it's like, well, if I can take care of myself first, then nobody else has to help me as much, and that's better, right?
No, I think that's a great way to explain it, because it does. I mean, even in a self-defense situation for citizen on citizen, it takes time for officers to get there. It takes time for someone to pick up the phone if they're able to call, right? So your first line of defense is yourself,
Yeah.
Talking about that, right? Like, hey, if more people do train, you do a lot of outreach in the community. You put on seminars, kids, women. I mean, couple things. What got you into maybe starting the outreach in the profession of law enforcement, because you said you did a lot of that prior, as well as maybe what is that first step for man, woman, or child to really make that leap into jiu-jitsu?
That's a good question too. I joked in the beginning to other people besides you, it's like, man, how can my position right now, I'm a community station officer, so that role allows me to have more time than a patrol officer would have to invest in meeting people, connecting, working with businesses, property managers. Having a consistent point of contact for our work is really important, versus you talk to some officer about some problem, then the next time you need assistance, it's like a different officer, you gotta re-explain the whole situation, and then you call again, it's another officer, right? That's not ideal, right? For anything. And whatever the issue is, if you have a consistent point of contact, it helps, because you don't have to keep on explaining and they're familiar with it. And our role encompasses that aspect, and I have more time to do it, and a byproduct of our position or that time is I can use it for other stuff. And then I tell people, I say, man, how can I make my job have all my hobbies in it and integrate it into it? Because that's the best, right? You can do something that you enjoy for free, for fun, as a work. It's like, that's the ultimate, right?
Yep.
And it's like, how can I do that? It's like, whoa. And that's how the skateboarding thing started. Luckily our city didn't have there's a person in our parks department that has a skateboard background, and I knew that before even meeting him. His name is Joe, because we have our city is a mid-sized city, and we have like 3 world-class skateboard parks.
Wow.
3. They have an outdoor kind of street plaza area. Right next to that is a 4,000 square foot indoor skate park, and then 2 miles from that, east of it, is a humongous bowl.
Dang.
And then it was like first time I seen all of those, like, somebody in the parks department over here skateboards, because there's no other reason why they would have 3. Like, this is not. There's no other reason. Somebody here has a skateboarding background and is the influencer behind this, and of course it was. And they have camps through those parks.
Cool.
And I was like, oh man, I skateboarded back in the 80s. Michael J. Fox and Back to the Future was a humongous influence. The Bones Brigade, Tony Hawk, Steve Caballero, Lance Mountain, Tommy Guerrero, Mike McGill, those guys, there was a group of people that was like the equivalent to like the boy band of skateboarding.
Okay.
Like, they would tour around the world, and people would show up, like thousands of people, thousands of kids, and they would do like demos and sessions all over the world. And I was just on the wave of that, riding that wave. And then I retired that for almost 25 years. So like at the beginning of high school, I kind of transitioned to the next like passion of mine, which was music. I played in the band all the time, stayed in the band room all the time, and then skateboarding became kind of like I just stopped doing it. And I had a new thing that took over. And then I seen the parks over here, and I knew they had the camps, and I was like, oh my gosh, like, I can skateboard. I could probably, in my mind, I could probably bring my board here. I didn't even have one. Like, if I had a board, I could bring it, and I could just ride around with these kids, and they would have exposure to a law enforcement that would be completely unique and totally different from any other typical way, right? And they would initially probably be like, "What the heck are you doing?" But then it would hopefully transition to like, it's no big deal now.
Yep.
And that's exactly what happened. And for the kids and the parents and the staff and like a lot of the people who just go to the parks anyways, it became just like I don't know, it just became like a regular thing.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, what else can I do that with? Like,
Yep.
It's like, oh, I can show up at a thing at the community center, we can do a class, like if they have foldable mats or something, and can do a self-defense class. It can be a regular thing, it could be like a scheduled specific thing. You can work with, what organization doesn't want a thing like that?
Yeah.
Or wouldn't want, like, oh, we don't need to learn self-defense. Like, domestic violence survivors.
What is
Housing.
what is the response from the outreach you've been doing? What maybe initially, and then obviously sometimes it takes traction time for traction to gain, things like that, and then where you're at now when you put these on. I mean, I've seen some of your videos on Instagram. You have quite a bit of people showing up for these, so maybe those two phases of what it was like.
Yeah, I mean, the self-defense was, I felt like it was way easier because it's like, who wants to learn how to protect themselves? We have a thing, free, people will show up to it, and we just, then it's just like a Jiu Jitsu class. Kind of, well, very similar in technique anyway, but through the lens of like, we're doing something to help our community, which is like, that's a win by itself already. I don't care what thing it is. If you're helping the community, automatic win. And then the person who's in there, they get the some kind of concept or principle or technique that they feel like, oh, this is really helpful. Like that, then they get a win, and then I mean, just wins all the way around. Cool. And I don't think, I mean, from the jiu-jitsu side, it was always, I think the only hurdle to start doing that, besides obviously having the time, you can't schedule something in advance without, okay, you gonna be there or you're not? I mean, well, I might not be there, but just show up anyways. You can't do that, right? You have to have a commitment to be like, okay, I'm gonna be there unless there's some kind of crazy situation happening. That's my block of time for this. The risk management side, there's a concern where it's like, oh, we don't want anybody getting injured, or liability is a huge issue or concern for any entity.
That magic word, liability.
that shuts down a lot of things from even starting, right? And luckily, thankfully for us, we had our risk manager people for RCD, Pete and Mike. I mean, they're probably, I don't really interact with risk management people, but the people we had before and them were very different. They're a big contrast. People before, we never seen them inside this training room. Those guys, like when they first started coming in, like they came in and they're like, oh, you guys doing taser training? Okay. Was it volunteer exposure to get the taser? Like, I'll do it. We're like, you sure? He's like, yeah, I want to feel, And that's anyway. There's a big that their openness to. I showed them. Okay, what do you want to do? He's like, self-defense, guys. Okay, this is what I'm going to show. Let me try to feel it. It's like, okay, and got the green light after that.
That's awesome.
So I mean, there's many pieces.
Having the support you need.
Yeah, well, you can't do it. There's no way you can do it otherwise. I mean, you can have the intention, like, I'm going to do this and that. It's like, you need to have the backing from, like, for us, the department backing, the city backing, because it's not going to work. It's literally not going to happen otherwise. And those pieces are unfortunately out of a person's control. Like, I can't, I can't influence that to make the person change their mind if they don't want to, or the entity doesn't want to. That's the hard part. I think that's a big challenge, because there's no person who doesn't think that could be potentially a beneficial thing. It's just having to convince. I feel like sometimes it takes a certain person to present it, and sometimes the situation, there's other variables that have to be in place. Like, I mean, gosh, if there was a unfortunate situation in the community where some person was, a crime was perpetrated against them, like a physical violence. I mean, a community might be, well, what kinds of things what tips do you have for us, officer? And be like, well, I can show you. I can show you some techniques. And it's like, to me, that's the highest form of empowerment, right? Because you can carry a phone, you can make sure you're aware of your surroundings, walk with another person. I mean, those are all valid things, but that doesn't give you the power yourself directly. Like, that's rely upon other stuff. That's like, well, what if I don't have another person? What if, I forgot my phone, or whatever, right? That's all external stuff. And I think the neat thing about the art is it's not a thing that you can remove from yourself. Like it's not a tool that you can physically remove. Like I can take off my gun belt, I can take off my vest, but I will always have the jiu-jitsu.
Yep.
And that's to me that's the neatest thing, right? It doesn't matter, as long as I have limbs, and even if I don't have limbs, I can still do jiu-jitsu. And it's a beautiful thing when you recognize like, okay, that's why it's so good, right?
Yep.
You will always have it with you, and if you train it in the right way, it will be for a very extended period of time.
Yeah. So you talk to the community quite a bit, and one thing, again, trying to draw people in jiu-jitsu, I think sometimes naturally men are attracted to combat sports much more, but I think equally as important, women need jiu-jitsu. What are some catalysts that maybe these self-defense seminars that you're hearing of stories, or maybe that one common thread that you hear, hey, this is why I'm here, and that can be a reasoning for people to try jiu-jitsu, or maybe forewarning for people, hey, this is a good reason to prevent this, if you have this ability.
Yeah, it's hard to get. That's one of the biggest challenges I feel like to balance out the genders, right? It's really disproportionate amount, and that in itself is making. I mean, that would make. If I flip it around and be like, well, this is just a bunch of like women in here, like I don't know. Yeah, it makes a person uncomfortable, right, when it's like that. And that sometimes is enough to be like, no thanks. Even though they know the benefit, right? So, I mean, the brothers speak on this a lot. Like, I mean, that's a huge, you look at, like I said, their classes have like 50, 60 women in it, in a regular women in power class.
Yeah.
Like, I never seen 50 or 60 women in a anything, like of a jiu-jitsu related thing before. It's like, it's like
or even maybe signed up in an academy. That's rare.
Total students. Like they have more women than total students of other people's gyms. Like, oh my gosh, like, they're doing something right over here. And I think one of the things that they recognize is stuff like, which I don't know, everybody has a different view on it, but having women-only classes, that's huge, because that's one of the first barriers of people like, wait, where's the other women in here? It's like, oh, there isn't any. There isn't any. All right, see you later.
Right.
I mean, there's something to that, and that's not an unreasonable thing. It's like, well, I'm not comfortable like getting smushed or sat on by another guy.
Yep.
Like even I'm not in the beginning. Like, I don't want this like heavy person to like crush me.
Yeah.
So I can relate to that a little bit, but having ideally the instructor would also be a woman, or at least one of them.
Yep.
Because then it's like, at the end of the day, just like how the brothers always talk about, like being 6'4", 200, to have that translate to a person who's like 5 foot, 100, you have to be an exceptional teacher or that size.
Correct.
And if you're that size, it helps because you have the connection, and it's just more relatable than having a person of another gender say, okay, this is what you do when you're attacked. I mean, there's a thing that is something to be said about having a person that's a woman as well instruct that, and that's not always possible. But if it was perfect world, that's what it would be. And that's why their setup is so good with Eve being and Victoria, Hidon's wife. I mean, they're like unbelievable. They're like the female version of the brothers. I mean, they're just so charismatic, so nice, and welcoming. And I mean, that's not when you factor all those things in. That's why they have so much students that would not probably even try jiu-jitsu in another environment. And I think that translates to other. Not just women, but any. You have to make the introduction, because they're women. The classes is not, okay, you guys gonna drill this, okay, let's go spar right now.
Of course.
I mean, that's gonna shut down the population of people who's even gonna show up.
Yeah.
If they see that, some people are like, I can't do that.
Yeah.
And then the argument, well, if you can't do that, then this is not for you. And I don't know about that.
Yeah, that's not.
I feel like, wait, that should be why it is for them. That's exactly why it's for them. If they feel like they're not able to do it, they need it more than the other person. And that goes for guys too. And I think the challenge is the way that this art has been typically introduced to people is obviously successful, because that's where we are right now, is because of jiu-jitsu. But is it as accessible for everybody? I mean, and some people will say, well, we don't want it to be, right? And it's like, okay, I get that, I understand. It's a very good badge of honor to have, to be like something that is challenging, right? Like it's like saying, well, I ran a marathon. People are like, oh my gosh, like how do you do that? That's unbelievable, right? But I mean, the downside is you already disqualify people right off the bat.
Correct.
Like, okay, if you can't hang, sorry, you got to do like whatever Tai Chi or something, and it's like, man, the art. If that's almost like literally the opposite of what part of the push to me was for the, especially on the brother side, right? the dad, the grandfather. That was the whole point of jiu-jitsu. It's like,
Right.
we're trying to neutralize this big, strong person's size and strength, and with the actual real thing that's not like fake Hollywood, pre-scripted fight sequences. Like that's what this is. And I think we forget, like, in a lot of ways, like if a person doesn't have the I'll just jump right in there kind of sink or swim appreciation, they won't do it at all. Right. They won't do it, or they'll do it and they'll confirm like, yeah, I definitely can't do that.
No, totally. I think, again, touching on that, like we talked about before, more people training jiu-jitsu will always be a positive thing. So anything negating or taking away from the potential for more people to train jiu-jitsu is bad.
It's negative.
Yeah, exactly. So I really like that, though, for maybe the instructors out there who may see this as, hey, a women's only class is super important. I actually talked recently to Stephen Galvez, the owner of Logic Jiu-Jitsu, and they have every Thursday, and they have 2 mat sections, and they have their women's only Thursday class. Well, if there's more women than men, they get the big mat space. He said that the last 8 or 9 weeks in a row, there's been more women than men on the mat every Thursday night, and they get the big space, right? And it's creating an environment that is drawing more women to jiu-jitsu. So I think that's such a great point that other instructors can know, like, hey, like, look to do a space, and maybe look for a female instructor who can help you with that, So on the flip side of that, let's say we finally get people into jiu-jitsu. We love this sport, we're passionate about it. How do we keep them here? And maybe what are the key things you're seeing that turn people away once they're in the door, and how do we keep them here to be able to train for longer?
Oh, that's hard. That's the $1 million question. That's the attrition of what we do is high, right? I mean, I think that's very commonly known, and like I said, some people like that. Like some people, it's like, it's like, wow, you've been training for 5 years. Like, how do you even do that, right? Because people remember when they tried it, and then 1 month in, it's like, my body cannot do it anymore.
Yeah.
And I think, presuming the goal is to get more people training and to keep them on the mat, there has to be some kind of shift or adjustment somehow.
What about specifically for you? How did you stay trained for so long?
One of the things is I recognized right away, partially due to my lack of being a big, strong person, like I'm not gonna be able to do certain things.
Okay.
Like if I try, unless it's my weight class.
Yeah.
Or my age, and get my age and 40 something, late 40s, light featherweight, okay, I'm gonna impose my will on you. Everybody else is like, there has to be this idea of yielding. I think that's that's why I really appreciate starting my journey with the brothers, because that's kind of like their whole hype, like yielding, deferring, because there's 2 mindsets. You can take it to the person, and that's correct. And you can also defer and let them take it to you, and you intercept. And that's I think they're both correct, right? Yeah. There's not like, whoa, this is right and that's wrong. Like, no, they both can apply, right? Counterattacking is just as important as bringing the fight to a person. And I think if you, as a person who was not ever a big, strong person, I was never going to be in the category of bring the fight to especially if it was an open mat situation. It's going to be hard for me to bring the fight. And if I do, I can't sustain that for the whole time.
Right.
I'm gonna have to, one guy, I can bring the fight to that guy, but everyone else, I'm gonna be like countering, defend everything, and the older a person gets, I think that shift has to happen unless you only spar with same age, same category people, weight class, because you can't sustain that for a long, I mean, some people are freaks of nature, like, I don't know, I think about old person like Randy Couture or some. There's an aberration at the end of the bell curve. Like, wow, this person should not be even doing this, but they're killing people.
Yeah.
There's those people, but I think most average people are not that. And then I think the problem happens when if a person, like for me, I didn't have that option, so I didn't have to switch. But the luxury of being smaller stature person is I'm always on the receiving end of something. Like I always have to counter something or get out of something and then I think that's a good thing because eventually your body will not sometimes allow you to initiate all the time.
Yeah.
And if you have to have a big shift in your way, some people they don't want to do that anymore, or they kind of accept,
Gotcha. So maybe what you're describing for the average and everyday person who and how we can keep them on the mats training longer is that mental shift.
Yeah, mental, huge.
Okay.
Expectation.
Expectation.
It's allowed to. Henner has this whole. He did a video, or actually, I was lucky enough to go to a seminar where he had this talking point at the end of his seminar. I was actually in Issaquah and at Barry and Jen Nakayama School in Issaquah, and he was talking about the idea of having your expectations or your idea of victory changing as you get older. That's huge. That's exactly, because you cannot train at any later age in this art and have the same mindset as you if you were in your 20s. Like, there's no way. Like, you have to change. Your body won't let you. And if you go all the way to the very end, like extreme end, like 80s or something, from the 90s, like their grandfather or whatever, right? If you're going to do jiu-jitsu, doing jiu-jitsu is different from, okay, let's spar right now. Doing jiu-jitsu for him at that age was just like surviving stuff.
Yep.
Like, okay, I'll be on the bottom of the mount and I'll just be like blocking your cross chokes and your arm locks, and that's jiu-jitsu right there, you know? And this transition from that being jiu-jitsu from when it was like, okay, we're gonna like go at it and kill each other, it has to change. And if it doesn't change, then your mind, your expectation of what you think you should be doing will not be met. And then you're gonna be like, well, should I keep doing it or should I quit? You know, and sometimes it's because of injury and everything like that, but there's a huge piece of this mental shift which has to happen if you're going to do this for, I mean, I don't know what age would be considered old for jiu-jitsu, but I mean, there's not that much 40-somethings. I mean, just from, once I hit 40, it's like, wow, look at, most people are not that age.
Well, it's interesting you're talking about that, because one of my good friends and main training partners for the last 2 or 3 years, he just had his 50th birthday, right? Strong guy, not because of specifically his genetics maybe, but he's been training, he's taken it seriously, you know. His mindset has changed, like you're describing, as he's grown in that position, and he can still whoop on me. You know what I mean? So it's cool to see that, and also letting people know, hey, jiu-jitsu can be for everybody at all age groups. Yeah. You know, and depends on how you take, how seriously you take your training, because there may be some things you need to adjust as you progress down the line.
I feel that being on the mat, at some point, at some age, whatever age that is, like just being on the mat is the victory.
Yeah.
You know, and that's, I think people have this idea, well, I gotta win this tournament or I gotta be on the podium or whatever. I mean, that's good too. That's not wrong and that's not bad. It's just not everybody can do that.
Yeah.
And is that the definition of what jiu-jitsu is? Like, I don't think so. Like, jiu-jitsu is just like having fun and doing an activity that you enjoy. That's it. And there's no other thing to me that other people do for enjoyment that is, they have that expectation, like, it's just like skateboarding or surfing. Like, I don't go like, well, I got a place in this contest. Like, first of all, I'm not even going to enter a contest. I'm not going to enter a competition. Like, I'm not doing this to display my skills in this thing. I just like doing it. Yep. Right, and that's why I do it. I'm not trying to. Right, and it's different because it's an independent sport. You're against nature, or not against another human. But it's like nobody does those sports to. I mean, people compete in it, but they don't do it because they're trying to. They just like it. They just love it. You know.
That's such a great point too. And you said something again. Trying to attract people in jiu-jitsu, it's fun.
Yes.
But multiple aspects of jiu-jitsu are fun. So as you get older, or I've battled quite a few injuries in my life through. There were not always from jiu-jitsu. It was other things. Well, that's how it goes. Watching your friends and training partners train, right? Keeping that schedule and being on the mats and being around jiu-jitsu is still an aspect of fun that I really enjoy about the art. Learning about it, talking to people about jiu-jitsu. So it's not just the rolling side of jiu-jitsu that is fun, it's the community, it's the environment. And once you understand, I think that could help keep people on the mats, or at least around the mats and around the community longer. What has your experience been? Because training at different schools, being around that jiu-jitsu community, what kind of sense are you feeling from other jiu-jitsu practitioners?
Yeah, it's a neat thing because of the community being relatively small. I mean, when we go to stuff like Revolution, you see like 700 people, like, oh my gosh. But then, I mean, you take it out of the context of that and put it into, well, how much people are in Washington? It's like millions, right? That's a tiny number compared to the entire population. And so there's a very neat sense of community. And I feel like, I don't know how it is in other states, because I know it's not always necessarily the same, but I feel our state, Washington, has a good kind of an open vibe to it.
Yeah.
They don't, sometimes depending on where it is, just by proximity to other schools, just by, like, you have this business right here, and then 2 blocks you have another one, and then 2 blocks that way you have another one. That kind of creates a vibe to be like, well, for the business side of it, we need to kind of keep everybody in-house. Right. It's like, you kind of go over there, and that idea, I mean, I understand that idea. The downside, I feel like, is it doesn't benefit the art.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, the part of the reason why we do this is like, well, it's a connection, a human being connection.
Yes.
And the neatest thing is when you have that connection through activity. Like, there's nothing like it. It's like playing basketball and going to where there's like open runs of some gym, and they're like, oh, these guys, I'll go play with these guys. And there's just, you don't have to have a verbal dialogue with a person. You can just, let's just train, let's just do whatever it is. And it's a neat thing when you can have that experience with other schools, other training partners in different places. And gosh, it's hard to, you almost bypass the, oh, hi, how you doing? You just like, oh, we're going right into like strangling each other. So there's all this, there's a quick progression to being kind of like, hey, I can't literally get any closer to this other human being, and we just try to like kill each other. So now we're friends.
Yeah, I mean, that's literally what happened this morning, right? It was such a fun, me, you, and Larry, such a great way to have a good introduction with us, right?
Yeah.
And I think we bypassed that quickly. Cool, we're here to train and have fun and get to know one another, which was awesome. And I think that leads into me just asking a fun question of, which you showed me earlier, but what is your game and why is it your game in Jiu Jitsu?
Well, I started in the gi, like we mentioned, and my game has always been on the bottom, like a typical small person, and what things can I do from underneath, And then it's kind of, I guess, that pathway is very similar to other people who are not big people, but just thinking of ways I can catch people in things that they would be doing on their own, like it was the right course of action for them, and catching them in a position or a submission that is almost half caused by them. Like, to me, that's the neatest thing about the art, where you can set traps and make people. Pedro Sauer is huge on that. Pedro Sauer, one of the coral belts, right? Probably one of the biggest ambassadors outside of the Gracie family for that family. Is the idea of counterattacking. I think that goes right in line with my personality and my jiu-jitsu. It's like, oh, you go first. Let me see what you're gonna do. And like, oh, okay. And trying to make that capitalize on that action.
Cool.
Versus me going like, I'll lift your arm up like this, and I was like, no. In fact, yeah. So the idea of deferring to the other person, I think that fits my temperament and my style just because of my size, and just trying to trick people. I think I think
I felt that this morning.
Many people who are not big, they have this like, let me set a trap, and I think it becomes like an inside joke, right? After a while, you'd be like, I didn't even get that. And then after you start, like, I try to do some move to Larry, like trying to do the grip like that, he just starts laughing, like, and we both have this understanding, like, okay, I can't do it to you because you know what I'm trying to do, right? I know, and then it's kind of I don't know, it's an unspoken, I don't even have to speak the same language, right? We can, like, oh, okay, you know that one? Very interesting.
For sure. That's super fun feeling your different styles, your traps, your flow, and I'm defending my collars like crazy. Like, he's just wrapping his hands on my, okay, I gotta stay away from this. So that was a blast.
It's like what is it comparable to? Like a language, right? People compare jiu-jitsu to a language, or at least like an accent, or some kind of, it's your own, you inflect your own personality into your action, I feel like, in the art. And it's neat.
It was great. It was super fun. It was super fun. I really enjoyed the experience. If you had to change one thing about the Jiu-Jitsu community as a whole, what would you say?
Oh man, that's a good question. Well, luckily I've had really good experiences with training over here. I mean, the openness of the state. I think I'm glad that I had my introduction in this kind of environment where people are like, oh, you want to come train over here, open mat over here, wherever. Cool. I think that helps perpetuate the art. What would I change? Maybe continuing that more, So cool. if I know there's people within schools that have friends in other schools, and including coaches and instructors. I think the dialogue between different places is important.
Cool.
And maybe just continuing that to keep more the open vibe. I think that's
awesome.
It's already in place, but I feel like
continue that, spread it more if need be. I love that.
We're lucky beneficiaries of that in our job, because I have not met a single instructor or any person in a coaching capacity that would be like, no, I don't want to come and help you guys do stuff. It's like the opposite usually. It's like how, what can we do? And it's a neat thing when it's set up like that. Everybody is so willing and open to help and share, because they understand it's a double win, right? When you do it. I mean, it's probably a triple win. The community, us, the person who helps out, And
You always bring back the triangle of jiu-jitsu.
yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah.
So much analogies of that.
I love it. And then lastly,
Yeah.
you know, we know you skateboard, we know you train jiu-jitsu, but outside of maybe those core things we're seeing on Instagram all the time, what do you do that's good for the soul?
I like music. I've always liked music. I played trombone all the way through college.
Oh,
That's
cool.
another little kind of weird looking thing that I would do in uniform. When I show up in the band room, after I talk to the teacher, you know, I say, I want to come and like introduce myself and maybe do some work with the low brass. And the first day I come in and they're like looking at me like, what happened? What's going on right here? So I was Officer Craig. He plays trombone, and everybody, and all the trombone guys are like, yeah. Like, the girls, if there's girls, they're like, yeah.
Love
Like,
it.
all right, you guys. So it's the same thing, right? It's like if you have a connection with another person through activity, you just bypass every single like. So what do you like to do? It's like you already know what you like to do. Like you like to do that thing, and
Cool.
that connection is such a neat, organic way to meet people. So music. What else? Probably the main other thing, not just like other instruments.
Yeah.
You can learn anything from YouTube. I mean,
Yeah.
YouTube, any instrument, anything. There's a tutorial for it.
And any jiu-jitsu technique, as we found out
Jiu-jitsu
this morning.
techniques, whatever it is, right? It's almost like cheating now.
Yeah.
You know, it's also potentially not a good thing because you can overwhelm yourself. And obviously, the instruction doesn't mean it's filtered or verified, right? It could be like terrible advice that you're seeing on the internet, and it's like, okay, that's not the best way to do that. But if you have an understanding of something, you can almost supplement that understanding in any skill set.
Yes.
It's like, oh, I know how to. I have a foundation. Like let me look at something and like how we learn moves. I mean, it's. I think before it was taboo. It's like you cannot learn from the internet. Like you obviously have to do it for real.
Yep.
But you absolutely can learn something from watching somebody. It's literally the same thing. The only difference is you don't have a immediate feedback from a instructor to tell you. You got to be the person deciphering that. But I mean, if you have the competency, you know, why not? Like,
Cool.
you can totally get another friend and be like, hey, let me try this with you, and then those two people can just deep dive into the thing, and it'll be very, very beneficial. And that's just other neat. The only downside of jiu-jitsu is you do need one other human being at least.
Yeah.
It's kind of hard to flow.
The grappling dummy doesn't do it right. It's not the same.
It's close, but it's not the same. And that's the one. If I had to say a detractor, you know, it's like you can skate, surf, run, bike by yourself, right? That's all. I mean, that's part of the reason we get away from people. But jiu-jitsu, you need one other person at least.
That's why I'm trying to draw people more into jiu-jitsu.
Yeah, more training partners.
More training partners, better community. Well, no, I just want to say thank you for having me over here at the headquarters, Bellevue Police Department, to train with you. It was a pleasure and great fun this morning. I think we had a great time. Learned a lot from each other.
Thank you so much.
I appreciate it.
Appreciate it, Victor.
Awesome.
See you guys.
Guys, if you've made it this far along, finish the interview, I just want to thank you again for supporting me along this journey, and hopefully you got something awesome out of that interview. I really enjoyed doing these, learning so much about life, jiu-jitsu, and everyone has such a unique and interesting perspective. So I hope you got something out of that that you can take with you. And one last reminder, for 10% off on any Jocko Fuel products or Origin USA products, go to jockofuel.com or originusa.com. Support yourself by getting some awesome products, supplements, protein shakes, greens, all that good stuff. It helps support me along this journey, and again, supports yourself and an American-made company. So yeah, jockofuel.com. Check it out, guys. Thank you very much.